Hello and welcome everybody to another episode of Books and Bytes. Today, we're going to be doing a deep dive into hard truths to keep Singapore going. It's a compilation of interviews with Lee Kuan Yew,
Oh, yes.
founding father of Singapore. And this book is just,
An incredible read.
yeah, it really is. For understanding his thinking about governing and economics and race and the future of
Well,
Singapore.
totally, it really is a unique opportunity to see into the mind of a leader who really shaped a nation. And I think what strikes me most is the rawness and the honesty. Even when his views are considered controversial or,
Yeah.
politically incorrect, he doesn't shy away from them.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It feels
Yeah.
like sitting in on these private conversations where he's just speaking his mind unfiltered.
Yeah.
There's so much to unpack here. One of the overarching themes that I found really compelling is his anxiety about Singapore's vulnerability. He uses this analogy of Singapore being like an 80-story building, but it's built on marshy land.
Yeah.
It's just this image of fragility.
Really captures that sense of precariousness, doesn't it? This idea that he constantly emphasizes the need for exceptionalism in every aspect of Singaporean life, from leadership to governance to the very character of its people.
It's like mediocrity is a luxury they just can't afford. He contrasts Singapore with countries like Denmark or New Zealand and suggests that they might be able to survive with less than stellar leadership, but for Singapore, it's an existential threat.
Right. And that anxiety comes from a deep understanding of history and geopolitics. He recounts incidents like Malaysia's sand export ban to Singapore, which he saw as a way to constrain their growth. And then there's that quote from Mahathir Mohamad who said, "If at their present size they are trouble, you let them grow some more, there'll be more trouble."
Wow.
So, it seems like he constantly felt surrounded by people who weren't necessarily wishing them well.
Yeah, and that really shapes his entire worldview. And it leads to this focus on exceptional leadership. He talks about figures like Deng Xiaoping, Charles de Gaulle, Winston Churchill with such reverence, and talks about their ability to rally their nations in times of crisis.
He's looking for that blueprint, isn't he?
Yeah.
For a leadership that can guide Singapore through any kind of turbulent waters.
Exactly.
And that search for exceptional leaders goes hand in hand with his belief in meritocracy. He talks about that rigorous selection process for government scholarships in Singapore. Where academic excellence is one piece of the puzzle, but they're also looking at character and leadership potential and what he calls the helicopter quality.
Oh,
It's
interesting.
like the ability to see the big picture, analyze complex situations. So it's not just finding the smartest people, it's about finding the people best equipped to lead.
But a system like that is bound to generate criticism.
Right.
Some argue that it creates an elite class, detached from ordinary Singaporeans, and they point to a lack of representation from grassroots activists in the government.
And that tension between meritocracy and representation is a theme that runs throughout the book. He acknowledges those criticisms, but ultimately he maintains that for Singapore's survival, having the most capable people in charge is paramount.
Now, one of the most challenging and frankly uncomfortable aspects of the book is how Lee Kuan Yew addresses race and religion, particularly his views on Islam. While he firmly believes in a multiracial society, he openly expresses anxiety about integrating Muslims fully.
And this is where we see some of that complexity in his thinking. He reflects on his own childhood, growing up with Muslim friends, and notes that the form of Islam he encountered then felt more relaxed and more integrated into the social fabric.
Right.
But he contrasts that with what he perceives as a shift towards stricter Islam, which he attributes in part to the influence of oil wealth from the Middle East, and funding for mosques that promote a more conservative interpretation.
And he doesn't shy away from expressing his concerns about the potential consequences. He worries about decreased intermarriage, stricter adherence to dietary rules like halal, and a general decline in social interaction between Muslims and non-Muslims.
Yeah, he even recounts a conversation with the Prime Minister of Mauritius, who expresses similar anxieties about growing Islamic conservatism in his own country.
So it's not just a Singapore thing.
No, it seems to be a broader trend that he's observing.
Exactly.
And it's in these sections that you really see him wrestling with this tension between his ideal of a multiracial society and his apprehension about this evolving nature of Islam in Singapore.
And this leads us to another controversial area where he expresses his views on eugenics and the role of genetics in shaping talent and intelligence.
This is one of the most provocative parts of the book, isn't it? He openly advocates for educated couples to have more children, believing that it would contribute to a more intelligent population. He even speaks about his own family, drawing comparisons between his children and grandchildren, and attributing their achievements to their genetic makeup.
It's fascinating, isn't it, how he applies this belief in genetic determinism to his vision for Singapore. Like he's trying to engineer a society where intelligence and talent are not just nurtured, but also in a way inherited.
Yes. And that connects to his approach to economic development, doesn't it? I mean, he was laser focused on growth, viewing it as essential for Singapore's survival.
Right.
But he understood that they couldn't compete with larger countries in manufacturing. So he strategically focused on attracting multinational corporations and developing that robust services sector.
He wanted to make Singapore indispensable, a hub for finance trade, high-value services he talks about, the importance of world-class infrastructure, a highly skilled workforce, a stable political environment, all designed to make Singapore attractive.
A magnet for foreign investment. You know, he even describes how he meticulously designed Jurong Island, Singapore's petrochemical hub, to be more efficient and attractive than any other competitor in the region.
It's incredible.
It really shows his attention to detail and his understanding that. In a globalized world, capital is incredibly mobile.
It's like he's always playing chess.
Yeah.
Several moves ahead, anticipating challenges, crafting these strategies to outmaneuver potential rivals.
Absolutely.
But this pursuit of economic growth wasn't without its consequences.
Well, yeah, he acknowledges that. Singapore's economic model led to significant income inequality. And he has that famous line, you want an equal society with low growth, or unequal society with high growth, then you take part of the growth and support the lower strata, which really encapsulates his pragmatic approach.
It's like, let's bake a bigger pie first.
Yeah.
And then figure out how to divide it fairly.
Yeah.
But it's important to note that he wasn't entirely indifferent to the less fortunate.
No, he championed programs like Workfare, which provided financial assistance to low-wage workers. But it was contingent on the recipient being employed.
Oh, interesting.
So it's about helping people help themselves rather than creating a culture of dependency.
And there's that interesting anecdote in the book about a Hakka shoemaker who had been making shoes for generations, inherited the business from his father.
Yeah.
And the shoemaker charged high prices for his custom-made shoes. And Lee Kuan Yew even admits to paying a hefty sum for a pair.
Right, and this story really serves as a microcosm of the income disparity that exists in Singapore.
Yeah.
But Lee Kuan Yew argues that halting growth wouldn't eliminate the envy or resentment. It might just create a stagnant society where everyone is equally poor.
Right.
He believed in creating opportunities for everyone to improve their lives, even if it meant accepting that some would get ahead faster than others.
It's a complex argument, but it's crucial to understanding his vision for Singapore. He was driven by a single-minded purpose to ensure the survival and prosperity of his nation.
Absolutely, and that drive is evident in how he tackled not just economic challenges, but also social issues, particularly those related to race and religion, and even individual freedoms.
Right.
And it's in these areas that we see some of his most controversial and thought-provoking ideas emerge.
Absolutely. Let's dive into those next. One of the most striking things about this book is how he doesn't shy away from expressing his concerns about the potential for religion to disrupt social harmony.
Right.
He talks about both Islam and Christianity, highlighting instances where he feels religious groups have overstepped their boundaries.
He specifically mentions Christian groups getting involved in political debates on issues like casinos and homosexuality.
Right.
He seemed wary of any group, religious or otherwise, that might upset that delicate balance of power and social harmony that he had so carefully constructed.
And this is where his anxieties about social cohesion really come to the forefront. It's like he views religion as this potential wild card, a force that could destabilize this carefully calibrated system he built. But it's important to note that, even while expressing these concerns, he never advocated for discriminatory policies against any particular faith.
No, he seems to be more interested in managing these differences, finding ways to ensure that everyone can coexist peacefully and contribute to Singapore's continued success.
That pragmatic approach, again.
Exactly.
Finding practical solutions, even if they're not ideal, to ensure the stability and progress of the nation.
And that leads to another fascinating aspect of his thinking.
Yeah.
He seems to believe that some degree of social control is necessary for a society to function effectively.
Right.
He's quite open about his skepticism towards Western-style liberal democracy,
Oh.
arguing that it's not necessarily the best fit for every society.
Interesting.
He seems to suggest that certain cultural values, like Confucianism, which emphasizes respect for authority and social order, are more conducive to that kind of disciplined society he envisioned for Singapore.
And he even expresses reservations about the concept of individual freedom, as it's understood in the West.
Yeah.
He argues that in a society like Singapore, individual freedoms must sometimes be subordinated to the needs of the collective.
A perspective that many might find challenging,
For sure.
but essential to understanding his worldview and the choices he made as a leader.
Yeah, it's a reminder that his approach to governance was deeply rooted in his understanding of Singapore's unique history, its vulnerability, and the challenges it faced. As a small nation in a complex world,
Absolutely.
his decisions, even the controversial ones, were driven by what he saw as the best interests of Singapore and its people. He wasn't afraid to make tough choices, was he?
No, not at all.
Even if they went against conventional wisdom. He prioritized stability, efficiency, and what he saw as the greater good, sometimes at the expense of individual liberties.
But he was also deeply pragmatic, wasn't he? He recognized that no system is perfect, no solution is absolute.
Yeah, he uses that phrase a lot. It's a matter of judgment,
Yes.
like acknowledging that there's no one-size-fits-all approach to governance.
Always weighing the benefits and drawbacks, looking for the most practical solutions for Singapore's unique circumstances.
Exactly.
And that pragmatism extended to how he viewed the future.
Right. Despite all those anxieties about Singapore's vulnerability, he expressed a sense of cautious optimism about the nation's future.
He believed that if Singapore continued to adapt, continued to innovate, to stay ahead of the curve, it could overcome any challenge.
There's that passage where he talks about Singapore needing to be like a trim tab, this small rudder that can steer a much larger ship.
Yes.
He believed that Singapore, despite its size,
Yes.
could have this outsized impact on the world stage.
By being nimble, adaptable, strategically positioning itself in key areas.
Like technology and finance.
Precisely.
He also emphasized education and continuous learning, believing that Singapore's greatest asset was its people.
Right.
He envisioned a society where every citizen is equipped with the skills and knowledge to thrive in a rapidly changing world.
And he acknowledged that Singapore couldn't compete with larger countries in manufacturing. But he saw a future where they could excel in those niche sectors, leveraging their technological prowess and their reputation for efficiency.
So Lee Kuan Yew's Hard Truths, it's more than just a political memoir, right?
Oh, absolutely.
It's a window into the mind of a leader who grappled with some of the most complex and challenging issues facing nations today. It forces us to think critically about the trade-offs inherent in governance, the balance between individual freedom and collective responsibility, and the choices we make as societies.
In an increasingly interconnected world,
Yeah.
it's a book that will provoke you, it'll challenge you, and honestly, it might even make you uncomfortable at times,
Yeah.
but it'll leave you with a deeper understanding of the complexities of leadership, the dilemmas of nation building, and the enduring legacy of a man who really shaped the destiny of a nation.
It's been a fascinating discussion.
Yes, it has.
Thanks for joining me on this deep dive.
It was a pleasure.